Hi, and welcome to my review for X-Men First Class. I just saw this movie the other day and I thought I'd give my opinions about it. So the movie starts off with showing us the Nazi concentration camps, and Eric Lencher is there, and he's separated from his family, and he's distraught, he's devastated, and basically from there, that is like this. As there's a line in the movie that says, I'm Magneto. Eric Lencher says, I'm Frankenstein's monster, and I'm looking for my creator. So basically, Eric Lencher, Magneto, his whole goal throughout this movie, and I think he is the main character of the movie, his goal throughout the movie is revenge. He's just seeking the person that killed his mom right in front of him, this Nazi general. So, who then later turns out to be the main villain of the film. So there's conflict there. That I think that setup is really great. If everything in the film would have been treated the way Magneto's story was treated, this would have been a great film. Unfortunately, everything wasn't treated that way. Now, basically, the other plot line that's going on is Xavier is Professor X. He's getting his doctorate and publishing his thesis on genetic mutation. And before you know it, he realizes, using this machine called Cerebro that the government lets him use, that there's all these mutants out there. And they basically start recruiting these mutants. And it's from there on out, it's kind of the formation of the X-Men, like how they originally, the first group of X-Men. There's a few other mutants, I don't really know their names, but they have like powers one person has like angel's wings, the other person is Beast from X-Men: The Last Stand, and another person is Mystique from the original trilogy. So basically, they start forming this group, and from there on out, the film then goes into it really emphasizes its Cold War setting and becomes the X-Men are trying to prevent the Cuban Missile Crisis from happening. So it's a revisionist history, but it's still pretty great. Just give my overall view of the film. I think the film is not, it didn't get everything right, but it got a lot right. What it got right was the character development, especially with Magneto and Professor X. That's when this film is at its best, is when the two of them are together and having an exchange of dialogue, because they're very similar, but there's one big difference between them, and it was their upbringing, how they view humanity because of their experiences in childhood. Xavier grew up in a mansion, which he later uses as the home base for the X-Men. Magneto, of course, did not have that luxury. He basically was on his own. He had to fend for himself. And his experiences in the concentration camp with them killing his mother and all of his Jewish friends right in front of him led him to believe that humans are going to do the exact same thing to mutants. It's only a matter of time. Professor X doesn't think that way. He believes that they should coexist together. And so basically it's this contrasting relationship between the two that's really the heart and soul of this film, and when the film is at its best is when these two are on screen. What doesn't work is the supporting characters in this film. They're not given enough depth. They never are in these films. That's the biggest problem with the X-Men films, is how do you have all these characters, but you can't really develop all these characters because you have to fit this film into a 2 hour, or a little over 2 hour frame. It just doesn't work. So, I mean, Lord of the Rings did it, but Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, with all those characters, was over 3 hours with the extended edition. So you can't really compare it to that because they had such a longer runtime. They couldn't do that with this. So basically, that's one of my criticisms of the film, is the lack of character development outside of Professor X and Magneto. The other criticism I have of the film is at times it felt like it was rushed. They weren't involving me in the story. Instead, they were telling me everything instead of showing me. They were telling me what these mutants are feeling, what they're thinking. We can just see that they're outsiders. We can see that they're afraid. We don't need to be told that. That's a problem in the film, as it is in most films nowadays in Hollywood. It's telling, not showing. More showing needed. One of the other criticisms I have of the film, and then I'm going to get into the positives again. One of the other criticisms I have is it doesn't feel like it feels a lot like the first X-Men film, but not like any of the other films. If this is supposed to be a prequel, generally you want it to feel like the other films. This didn't really feel like X2. Um, it just is. The story is almost too big for its own good. Preventing the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, I thought that was a good idea, but maybe for like a second movie, not for this opening movie. For this opening movie, you wanted a much smaller story. They didn't get that. That's just that's just my opinion, though. I mean, it was a good idea. It was just I think that could have been used in the second movie instead of this movie because you really have to get to know these characters before you can set them off on these adventures like they did in X2. I don't know, but this one of the positives. This film is much better than X-Men: The Last Stand. I really didn't like that film. I felt like it was really poorly written, rushed, badly directed by Brett Ratner. Overall, just a really poor ending to a great start to a franchise with X-Men 1 and then X2, which I think improved on X1. This film, I think, is better than X1. It's not as good as X2, though. People who are saying it's the best in the franchise, I don't think it's the best. There's some issues with it, mostly in the script. The dialogue is good at times, but at other times it's really cliched and cheesy. It was almost like they had a really good first draft and then somebody came in and kind of messed with it, or maybe vice versa. I don't know, but you know that's just writing, and the director is supposed to be able to look for weaknesses in the script and improve on them. Matt Vaughn, the director, I think he did a very competent job. It wasn't a great job. I mean, there were some parts where I was like, wow, that's really good directing. But there are other parts where I'm like, who cares who's directing this? And it's an X-Men movie. But clearly you do need a good director because when you don't have one, you get X-Men The Last Stand and X-Men Origins Wolverine, which are both terrible films. So I think it is important to have a good director like Singer, who was in for 1 and 2, and now Vaughn. He did a pretty good job. One of my other... Okay, so now I'm going to get into the positives of the film. The positive is, obviously, as I mentioned before, the relationship between Magneto and Professor X is very well done. That's the best part of the film. That's the heart and soul of the film. The other good positive of it was the CG was actually really good. I believed it for the most part. I mean, a couple of the mutant abilities were kind of shaky, but the Cuban Missile Crisis sequence is really amazing. That's the best sequence of the film, the last 30 minutes, or 25 minutes roughly, and it ends really great with Magneto confronting the person that killed his mom. And he's basically given a choice by Xavier. He can be the better man, let him live, just prevent the crisis from happening, or he can take the other road where he is going to only seek revenge and only seek to kill him for his own personal selfish reasons. That's the deciding factor. That's like the big decision at the end of the movie is what is Magneto going to do? Which path is he going to take? Now, if you've seen the other films, you kind of already know which path he's going to take because him and Xavier, while they mutually respect each other, they have such different views they could never possibly be on the same side. And this film definitely builds that up through their decisions that they both make, why they're different, why they're also similar. They are similar, but they're also very different. I don't want to get into too much because I don't want to spoil it, but the ending is really great when Magneto's confronted with this decision he has to make. What else? I recommend this definitely for a lot of X-Men fans. I think it's much better than X-Men The Last Stand and X-Men Origins Wolverine. It's not as good as this X2, and it's also probably a little better than the first X-Men movie. Just a little bit, though. It's almost right on par with that movie. As far as other superhero films go, I think it was just as good as Thor this year. Definitely better than some other superhero films I've seen, like Fantastic Four. In terms of like origin stories, better than Fantastic Four. I think it is better than Iron Man. I'm not a big Iron Man fan, even though I know a lot of people are. It's not as good as the first Spider-Man. So overall, it's definitely like somewhere above average. Not as good as Batman Begins either, but it's above average. Do I think the casual film goer will like this film? Probably not, because there's a lot of inherently assumed understandings about the mutant, about X-Men, like the lore of it and everything. I don't think that the casual film goer might like this film. I think it's more for the people who have stuck with the series and want to see how these characters originally came to be. Also, I feel like it's definitely not going to attract younger audiences because it deals with a historical event. I'm not sure younger kids are going to get this film. I don't really think it was made for them. I think it was made for people like above the age of 15, maybe 14. So overall, though, it's a pretty decent film. I recommend it. I'd give it, if I had to give it out of 5 stars, I'd give it a 4 out of 5. I think it was really good. There's some issues with it, as there has been with every film in this series except X2. That was the best film in the series. I think they can improve on this, though, and make a better film than X2. They can do it. I've said X-Men 3 could have been the best film. It could have been better than X2. It wasn't. This film wasn't, but the next film can be. They've set it up really well. They've got the characters. They've got the good acting. They got the director. They have it all set for a really good sequel. It ended really well too, and so it can't. They've set it up well. I want to see where they go with it. But overall, I was pleased with this film. I would recommend it without hesitation. Thanks for listening.